Very pleased to introduce our next speaker, who's Dr. Mario Apostolov. If you could just take your seats, please. Thank you. So Dr. Mario Apostolov is the Regional Advisor for the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Dr. Apostolov was awarded his PhD from the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva and has carried out a postdoctoral project on cultural communities and international security. In his current position at the UNECE, Dr. Apostolov works at the UN Economic Commission for Europe as regional advisor in the Trade and Sustainable Land Management Division, assisting the transition of a number of economies and the integration of the EU economy. More specifically, he manages technical assistance projects, advises governments on expert issues, and organizes international conferences. Additionally, Dr. Apostolov has been published widely in the fields of international trade and international security. Today, he will be speaking on the topic intercultural relations and the challenges of the global crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Mario Apostolov.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have to excuse myself. I didn't have time to shave, so I'm a bit in an artistic shape. But I just come back from Tbilisi, and as I didn't sleep, it's kind of a continuation of the conference that I was organizing there. It was on trade facilitation. We had the three countries of the South Caucasus: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, plus Turkey and Ukraine. And, well, it was the second time we were organizing this particular conference in this setting. And my dream has been for the two times to have all, the other neighbors like Russia and Iran. And this is something that reflects on what I understand in this talk about cultural diplomacy. Bringing people together from different backgrounds and make them work together. We haven't succeeded for the time being, but let's hope in the future we can do. And also Switzerland we would like to invite, because maybe some of you know that Switzerland has been involved in this trade or technical negotiations between Russia and Georgia, so that they renew at least their trade relations. Well, one of the things about this talk, which I was very grateful for the organizers for the invitation, and I have done it mostly from a different perspective, not my UN work, but the other work which was just presented. I did a PhD on cultural relations and security, but one of the books I published after that, it was based on a small section which I expanded, was on the Christian-Muslim frontier. So that would be the first subject. Then I'll talk a bit about the basic features of the world today. Then about the background of the crisis, how the crisis relates to the development of cultural relations, world society, values, etc. And then some practical deductions. This is the structure I would suggest. Well, I'm grateful to you that you presented me already, so I don't need to go further. I have my first university degree from Moscow, then my PhD from here in Geneva. And what I can add to all that is that I'm teaching right now in a small private university in Geneva on the dynamics of regional cooperation, which also has certain interesting practical aspects. You know, it's not a given that in a region, like for example the South Caucasus from where I'm coming, it's not a given that they are a region and they have to cooperate. You have to build the cooperation, and the dynamics can go in a bad direction, in a good direction. So this is the book I mentioned, which is like when I was working on it, it was probably my favorite piece of intellectual work. The concept of the Christian-Muslim frontier as a zone in which the option between cooperation or conflict is open. It was, I wrote it before the 11th of September. Well, you're familiar with all these processes of publication. I understand most of the people are from academia. The editor was thrilled by the idea, but in the panel there was a how do you call it, a marketing specialist, and that person said, "Who will buy a book on Christian-Muslim relations in a geopolitical sense?" That was in May 2001. Can you imagine how far from reality these people in marketing are? So after the 11th of September, they told me immediately send the same contract, but then I said I'll wait. So I changed a lot in the book, and it was published in 2004. In 2010, it was published again, and it was also translated into Arabic. I like the cover, which is the Bible and the Quran. They invented it themselves in Cairo when they published it. This is basically the concept that this is a zone. In what I would like to stress here in this talk is the idea that these relationships, the cultural relationships between large cultural complexes, they are always related to politics, to political relations. And in history, this frontier between Christianity and Islam was a frontier of a movement between a movement of the frontier between big empires based on religion. The Christian Empire, which was the Byzantine Empire, the Arab caliphates, then the Ottoman Empire. Then when the Ottoman Empire annihilated the Byzantine Empire, actually the Austrian Empire and the Russian Empire are created on the basis of their cultural of the relationship to religion. They had their how to say, legitimation in the fact that they were defending Christianity. That's why, like Vienna was saved once by one of the two sieges of Vienna was actually resolved by the Polish king, because all the neighboring Christian countries gave a legitimacy to the small Austrian kingdom to become a big empire. The same thing with the Russian Empire. They started with liberating themselves from the Muslim Tatars, Mongol Tatars, and then they continued enlarging their empire primarily in fighting the Muslim powers like the Ottoman Empire and the Iranian Empire. But my key idea in this slide and in my book is the idea that it's a constructivist approach to the frontier between Christianity and Islam. Like every generation defines for itself the relationships with the other. And just to link it to maybe you have different ideas of cultural diplomacy and cultural issues, but to link it to certain cultural artifacts, like there is a linkage between the political realities and the cultural atmosphere, environment in which we live. These are two pictures that I took. You probably know these two buildings very well. One of them on the right side is the Hagia Sophia, which used to be the cathedral of the Christian Empire, of the Byzantine Empire, which was turned into a mosque. And the other one is the principal mosque of the Cordovan Caliphate in southern Spain, which was then converted into a Christian church. And you can see even inside you have elements like in the Mezquita in Cordova, you have altars with it's amazing. Like those of you who have visited, it's really amazing. A Moresque mosque, and inside the mosque you have a Catholic cathedral, including in certain angles you have these crosses, etc. And on the right side, this is the gate of the Hagia Sophia mosque, which used to be before 1543, if I'm not wrong right now, when it was conquered by the Ottoman Turks. There used to be a cross, and you can still see that the two wings of the cross, which were cut in order to make it a mosque. Then the next topic, like what are the changes that mark our world? In order to, well, this was the idea to put some basic elements, the basic features of the world we live in. Like, first of all, the end of the Cold War. It's the end of the bipolar world, and I've been dealing, like, the book that I published on the frontier between Christianity and Islam was financed by the so-called World Society Foundation. And the idea, when you think about world society, is always about values. Kind of what happened after the end of the Cold War. We were all hoping that it would be a world of a unity of values. Maybe it was a dream, maybe it's reality. Then another point, which is also should be asked as a question, was this the end of the Westphalian structure of the world? Now we have these regional groupings like the European Union. In the Far East, you have a totally different system, you know, which is the traditional system. You have, well, traditionally there was the Central Empire, and then there were tributary kingdoms, which it was not a Westphalian system, and maybe it's the same thing that's happening again in East Asia. Then another major event, I already mentioned that, was the 11th of September. Well, 2 weeks ago I was in a conference in Ukraine, and there was the head of FIATA, the Freight Forwarders Association. You know, for him the major event which changed their world, the world of freight forwarders, is the 11th of September, because it completely changed the world which was free trade. All of a sudden security came in the center. So even for those free traders, exactly, to come back to the breaking point, which I mentioned with the publication of my book, this was a major change. But what exactly did it lead us to? Was it a new confrontation? What was this? War on terror? War on Islam? I don't know. Maybe people have clearer answers to that than me. And now we are living through an economic crisis, which is basically a crisis of disbalances. Like, how can one explain that in 2 words? Well, for example, when Britain was the workshop of the world, it was ruling the world. Now China is the workshop of the world. Why shouldn't China rule the world? Well, is that one, like, we had this strong, well, in the West there was this strong belief of that the West, and in the West one thing can include North America, Japan, had a cutting edge in finance and innovation. But that is disappearing. The Chinese researchers are not only catching up, but they are going ahead. The educational system is also going ahead, and in finance the same thing. People are looking at banks in Hong Kong for money, and in the Middle East. So the cutting edge is slowly disappearing. It's not only that in East Asia they turn nuts and bolts, but they also are taking over the cutting edge in finance and innovation. So again, I'm asking that question, like, then what will happen? Because with the change, with all these changes, will the values which were, like, there were some predominant values before this crisis, what will happen next? Like, this crisis, I would like to compare it to an earthquake. Like, there are tensions, and all of a sudden they release. Boof. What will happen next? We have to see. So, well, one can often think about triangles, and you know, it's difficult to I was thinking when I was flying from Tbilisi this night, I was thinking whether to eliminate these slides, but because it's a concept that one can see from practical things. Like, quite often the world develops on triangles. And what triangle can I mention now? For example, well, in my book I'm talking a lot about this thing like Western Christianity, Eastern Christianity, and the Muslim world. And you can see it in many occasions, including Afghanistan. including Afghanistan, where this triangle with closing one, well, now we are in a situation more or less when the United States and Russia are collaborating to do whatever they can do, because not much can be done. And you have these changing issues, like it's a long topic, but sometimes there, like the same thing in the relationship between, let's say, Russia, the West, and China. I was recently in, I work a lot with Central Asia, and one can see that there are different interests, and sometimes maybe there are, for example, the Asian Development Bank, where the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Americans are cooperating in Central Asia. And quite often that's against the interest of the old, let's say, colonial power, Russia, in that region. So these triangles, they are moving, changing. It's a dynamics which is quite interesting, and you see it on the spot quite often. I also mentioned already this idea about a forming non-Westphalian system, which probably always existed in East Asia. So one of the topics that has always concerned me in this thinking and working on world society is the movement of the world, like from a modern to a postmodern world. Like this is basically a term from architecture, postmodernism, and it means. And there are two pictures here. One from Moscow, the International Trade Center, built by Armand Hammer, the millionaire who traded with the Soviet Union all the time. And the one on the right is the Eaton Center. These are the two classic buildings of postmodernism. And the idea that some sociologists and politologists took about postmodernism was exactly externalizing the interior, making the interior look like the outside, like trees in this hotel, or birds flying in the Eaton Center. And this is what is happening in our societies. Like in France, there are so many people from all over the world. Geneva is a perfect example. Like sometimes I enter back from a mission early in the morning, and I take the bus, and practically there are no Swiss people in the bus at 8 o'clock in the morning, in the bus that I'm taking from the airport, after the airport. So the idea is that there are these immigrant, expatriate communities, but it's not, as you probably also have thought about it, it doesn't lead to a complete melting pot. It leads to internal, functional frontiers, which are the typical postmodern ideas of the functional frontiers of people. When you meet the other, you don't only meet him, you realize the differences. And here I want to evoke again, like this book of Ivo Andrić, who won the Nobel Prize at some point, A Bridge on the Drina. You have probably read that book, but the point is that the bridge is not a bridge to make friends. It's a bridge to exercise power, to occupy, to control. So it's not always evident that a bridge, a contact, in the increasing contracts in our postmodern world leads to harmony. So it's this one I will. This is the other element, the end of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War, I already mentioned the idea that we were hoping to have a harmonious society. But what happened is that at some point, the neoliberal wave became quite confident that it was exactly the neoliberal economic approaches which in politics led to certain new conservative views. The conviction that it was because of them that the Cold War was won probably led to certain disbalances, which actually we saw with the coming of the current crisis. So in a way, we didn't have I put these two slides exactly to indicate this point that the big hope of a harmonious world didn't actually come true. And there are new kind of fault lines which we have to look at and think of. What are they? Are they new ideological fault lines with kind of these big cultural communities in the world confronting? Will there be a new superpower confrontation between East Asia and the West? It's quite interesting to see how this will work out. And but discrepancies are building not on, well, obviously people know about these things. Last year I went to a conference, again organized by this World Society, and the person who won the first prize, it was a conference with a prize, was an American or Canadian academic of Chinese origin, of course, who wrote a paper on the end of the Chinese model. Well, these slides show how, like, it is expected that in 2017 China will become equal in its share in world production to the United States. Well, okay, there are certain concerns about the value systems, how it will go, the sovereignty system, and there are certain China. And this is all data. Well, I have to check for some more recent data on the U.S. Treasury bonds held by Chinese and Hong Kong, which is quite impressive. These are quite impressive figures, and the growth for 1 year, like the last years before the crisis, were impressive. But this is the slide I wanted to show. This is taken directly from the presentation of this person who won the first prize last year. He was saying that the subject of his paper was the end of the strange death of the East Asian model. And he was showing through this slide. This is a slide showing the revenue of in the different countries. Like in Japan, they started from low revenue, and it was an export-oriented country. And at a certain point in the 1960s, they reached the levels of the other Western countries. So the country became a typical country, developed country. The same thing with South Korea, which reached in the 1990s the same levels. There is a strange situation with Taiwan, which was growing, and then at a certain point it even started going down. But maybe that's a moment when they, in practice, they integrated some of their economy with continental China. And the lowest line is the revenue pattern in China, which is staying low, and this is the point about it, like, will China survive these discrepancies much longer? Because they, you see, this I took from The Economist at some point, and the graph on the right side clearly shows that the income of the country is growing with their export-oriented economy, with their impressive GDP growth. But it's so impressive how, in relative terms, relative to GDP, wages and private consumption are really falling. It's the idea of that article was that this is a non-sustainable situation, so that these balances are also hurting the other side. Okay, so I'm going to the last portion of my presentation, which is about what I understand in terms of cultural diplomacy against this picture of the world we live in. The basic problem might be a feeling of insecurity on the different sides of, if you think about a fault line. So what would be that insecurity in the developing world? One would think, first of all, initially this was a feeling of insecurity from aggressive colonialists who were coming, conquering, exploiting, etc. On the other, then it became a fear from an economic, not a fear, but let's say insecurity from an economically advanced West, which was kind of more competent, powerful, better organized societies. Yet one can clearly see that this was reasoning in the elites. It was, well, the population in the developing countries still just wants to live better. Various ideological trends in those countries, including Marxists, Islamists, nationalists, they thrived on that insecurity. They make their political message on the basis of that insecurity, and there were different responses to that. One of them is what was Deng Xiaoping's transformation of China. Like they tried to get many of the technological elements of the innovation, organize themselves on the basis of what they had as a social structure, and make a strong leap ahead, still keeping the grip on power. What will happen with all that? I have Chinese friends, and I'm asking them, how do you reconcile the ideological system that you have with this capitalist economy that you, this something which is driven by the capitalist economy? And now we have a new source for this insecurity, which is basically the feeling in the West that East Asia is growing very fast. There are all these people with a lot of money from the Middle East or from Russia. So they are coming with their different values. So what will happen next? So the problem is the insecurity. And, well, I already mentioned this idea about the rising powers which are more and more involved in the world economy. In the UN, they have their growing agendas, which are pragmatic. Maybe, well, the UN is always one of the tools which is on the side. They have other tools which they are organizing. Some of them will struggle. Well, let's say Islamism, if one thinks about, we can't cover everything here, but Islamism will struggle internally in the Muslim countries to get a stronger role in politics, but also in the among the diasporas to get a stronger grasp of the minds of the Muslim masses. Maybe similar with some other diasporas and populations. Well, what is happening in the Muslim world right now? This slide is illustrating my idea about Turkey for many years. Like it's a balance between the military and Islamism. You remember how when Atatürk came to power, they completely eliminated the power of the clergy of Islam. And then with time, now the military are kind of more discreet, and there is moderate Islam. Moderate Islamic parties are in power. And it's the same thing which is developing in Egypt, for example. It's a balance. It's a balance which goes probably in this way. So what will happen next? We are still reading the newspapers. There were these events in Egypt on the newspapers today. So we'll see how it will go on. So the goal of cultural diplomacy is, well, I see it on the one hand side, this is the exchange of cultural artifacts, exhibitions, concerts, so that people get closer together. But this is not, this is one aspect of it. The other one is communication to the other. Communicating, well, in diplomacy is always kind of the idea is you're communicating in order to achieve your goals. Probably we have to see how it will develop, and it has to be studied more. These cultural complexes have to be studied more. What is the idea for the future? How this will develop? In order to make this meeting the other a positive element for the future of the world. Globalization, we have talked about globalization, there are economic aspects, but it also means meeting the other, creating new frontiers, these functional frontiers. I wanted to cite here Tsvetan Todorov in his thin book, The Conquest of America, of how one deals with the other. If you have dealt with this book, there are three levels. Like Columbus, when he discovered America, he didn't know he actually died without knowing that he didn't discover India. A road to India. But then there was Cortés, who knew the locals, but he despised them, and he managed to conquer them. And there was this Las Casas, who knew them and liked them, and he managed to convert them to Christianity. He was the cardinal, I think, who was working on converting them. So this is the issue of kind of the different levels, the different possibilities of meeting the other, communicating with the other. So at the end, you can achieve your objectives. And you see, maybe Cortés had Columbus didn't achieve his objective. He wanted to go to India. Cortés achieved his objective. He conquered land, conquered gold, or whatever, silver. And but in Las Casas had the other idea, to conquer the minds of people. So he was probably the most successful. So this is about the exhibits. This is a picture that I took in order to illustrate the idea of diplomacy having to deal with cultural differences. This is a picture I took myself from a conference in March this year in Tajikistan. And there are 4 presidents here of Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Iran, and Pakistan. And you know, not many people can gather this type of. Not many countries can manage to gather these 4 presidents together to talk about. And it was actually a cultural pretext for the event. It's the Nowruz festivity. I don't know whether you know what Nowruz is. You're probably from Kazakhstan. Yeah. So this is an old Zoroastrian festivity, which was oppressed both by the Muslims and then by the communists. But it comes up because it's an old Zoroastrian. It fits in the Zoroastrian religion. It's a kind of a rebirth of nature in the spring, and people like it. People always celebrated it. So it comes now that the presidents gathered together. There was a funny incident during this meeting, when the American delegation left, when Ahmadinejad was speaking, but let me not go through it. The idea is that this is the cultural diplomacy that I understand on the second level, the one bringing cultures together so that they deal with the major issues of peace. And Afghanistan is the major issue of peace today. So what I wanted to say at the end, going to interventions in the Muslim world or wherever, East Asia, etc., at the end of after the end of the Cold War, after the 11th of September, and the current economic crisis, is the sheerest nonsense. You know, you see where I'm leading, but probably some of you guess where I'm coming from. I read recently, when I was preparing this presentation, I read one of the papers with which George Kennan became famous. It's the Long Telegram, in which he actually put the strategy in 1947. I think these were 2 articles, and this was really a long telegram when he was a diplomat in Moscow, and he put exactly this wording, like intervention against the Soviet Union would be the sheerest nonsense, because it doesn't make sense. So the point is, there is a commonality of interests. People are peace-loving in the West, in the East, in the Muslim world. They are willing to meet others, to talk to each other. Well, East Asia, as I tried to show, is also suffering from this crisis, because if there is nobody to buy the Chinese goods, they will be suffering. So in the same thing, like about the Muslim countries, there is a drive for modernization, stabilization. So there are common interests, and it's not the point of interventions, but more like finding possibilities for modus vivendi. China, as the Soviet Union at the time when Kennan was writing his papers, is not an adventurous power. It doesn't make unnecessary risks. Similar, one can remain common grounds in order to keep away from problems. Like, I also looked at Kissinger's book Diplomacy, which was written in the 1990s, where he is really advising that diplomacy should go in the, well, especially the leaders of the Western democracies, the US should go for the defense of national interests. And the ideal of collective security, which is the UN basically, is weak, and because it is not grounded in national interest. But let's hope that this is not the case, and we can still look forward, like in educating the cultural diplomacy can contribute to educating the masses in the different cultural complexes on the on who the others are, because there is nothing as terrifying and as dangerous as the unknown. And it depends much on the health of the Western societies, both in economic terms and in terms of the cultural values, which have actually brought the current stage of development of the world around, so that we can see how things can work forward. And the point is that people are tired of demagogical statements, and they are more interested in their security, everyday security, than in certain ideological statements, etc. So this is basically my presentation. Sorry if I was too long.
Thank you very much. So, does anybody have any questions for Dr. Apostolov on anything you said in his presentation? Yeah, if we just go to the back, and then we'll come to Jan at the front.
Thank you very much, Dr. Apostolov. I'm quite amazed that you've found out that I'm from Kazakhstan. Yeah. My name is Alia Tayan. All right. Okay. Yeah, I'm coming from the Central Asian region, and I'm sure you know it very well yourself due to your project. I'm wondering, you presented these cases where people actually are willing to communicate and cooperate, right? Across the nations and across the Western countries, Asian countries, whatsoever. However, my concern right now is about the issue of geopolitics. When you have, for example, Kazakhstan previously was exporting a large amount of wheat to Iran, and had a very economically beneficial swap agreements in oil and with Iran. And right now we cannot operate these agreements anymore due to the Iranian economic sanctions imposed by the Western countries and the United States. So how do you, people are willing to cooperate, states are willing to cooperate, but your policies do not allow that. So how do you incorporate that in your understanding? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a bit tired, so I would prefer to answer right now because I can't. The idea is that, well, first of all, I haven't thought about that problem because, well, first of all, if there are sanctions by the West on Iran, why should Kazakhstan be touched? Like, I was in, that conference was in Tajikistan, and the US Secretary, the security advisor was the head of the delegation, and he was the one who led when they left, when Ahmadinejad was speaking, and then they invited the Central Asian countries to cut their relations with Iran. And I spoke with the Tajiks, with the Tajik diplomat. They said this is nonsense. I mean, they speak the same language. For once they have good relations, they don't think of cutting their relations. And I'm surprised what you say. I have no information that that Kazakhstan is not exporting wheat. Kazakhstan, I think there were some other problems, like they stopped exporting wheat even to Kyrgyzstan for some economic reasons. I'm not sure how exactly is the situation, but I don't know, to tell you the truth. On your question about Kazakhstan, I work a lot with, we have a lot of colleagues and I have friends there. I think for Kazakhstan is a different, if we come back to my presentation, Kazakhstan has another civilizational, geopolitical, as you're mentioning, issue, because it's a huge country with a lot of resources, and it's between China and Russia. And they have to make they had probably to make a civilizational choice, whether to go for integration with China or with Russia. And by joining this customs union and now this Eurasian Economic Commission, they have shown one tendency to join Russia, and through that they are showing kind of some linkage to Europe, because seen from Kazakhstan, Russia is Europe. But there are certain lingering things. I'm not sure whether the whole road is completely set up. To answer shortly to your question, because it was referring also to geopolitics.
Okay, and then did you want to come to the front, Jana?
Yes, hello, I'm Jana Pöri. I come from Finland, but I live here in Switzerland. You were talking about the challenges of the global crisis, and the big one that I picked up was insecurity, coming from everywhere, or all kinds of situations and countries and regions. But when there's a crisis, there can be also opportunity. There are opportunities. What would you see are these opportunities that are coming from this crisis?
Yes, I don't know whether we are thinking about the same thing, but somebody told me that in Chinese, part of the word crisis contains opportunities. So the insecurities, they are long-term, but they are, some of them are really pointed out, like people are more afraid of, let's say, of China growing up now, afraid of the situation, let's say, with Greece, which will never be cured, what will happen with the euro, etc. So these are insecurities which reflect on relations to the others. Luckily, we are not yet in the situation of the Great Depression, because the last time there was such a big crisis, what happened afterwards, you know, it was the Second World War. And last year, when I was preparing my paper for this World Society conference, I was very optimistic, saying we don't see anywhere right-wing, really right-wing hard parties coming up. But now, if we look at Greece, if you look here and there, one can start doubting. And these are insecurities, and insecurities feed up these negative things that are growing up. What are the opportunities? I strongly believe, and I mentioned it, that this crisis might serve as like an earthquake. You have the disbalances, because it's a disbalance. Like I'm repeating myself, China being the workshop of the world, and then the power exercising the world. But also, this comes from the fact that some countries in the West, and it's very clear which countries were focusing a lot on the cutting edge in finance and innovation, etc., they got hurt. Those which were turning nuts and bolts, like Germany, they are doing better. And that's the point. The countries which are more severely hurt now, they have to start producing again. How the system will be rebalanced, we'll see. And maybe the crisis with this earthquake, which is making whoop, may produce again the possibility that people will see, and let's hope we'll see. And in this sense, like when we read what is happening, like the discussions, the criticism even from the United States about the policies in Europe, they are not focused on restarting this production, how to rebalance the world economy so that the countries start producing again. By the way, I heard that Mr. Supachai was speaking here yesterday. One of the most wonderful speeches on this particular issue about people who have stopped producing and relying on financial assets, etc., including Egypt. He brought up figures about Egypt that wages constitute something like 1/3 of the income of the people. Everything else was kind of financial instruments. And he was saying that this was a major reason for the crisis in Egypt. So restarting production might be the big opportunity. So all countries have to restart.
Okay, I think we have one more question at the front, and then we can move to the back, okay?
Thank you for the very interesting presentation. My name is Nargiza Rupova, and relating to your statement about the relationship of China and the Islamic world, and when looking, especially within China itself, I'm sure that you're aware that there is a Muslim minority living in the autonomous region of Xinjiang, and which are still oppressed, and especially after 1109. And I find it really amazing that the international community does not react to this situation, especially because China is one of the major economical partners. And so I would just wonder, do you think that there is a dialogue that is possible between the international community regarding the situation with China?
You know, this is more or less a conceptual presentation, and I'm very glad to have it, because it's kind of, for me, it's a bit going out of the rigid work on trade facilitation that we do, etc. What you are saying is kind of, let's put it this way, there is realpolitik, and basically the relationship with China is based on realpolitik. I mean, the Western countries, Russia, realpolitik leads to some problems at certain points, because you calculate something and it doesn't happen like that. And for the time being, what I would say, nobody believes that something will change tomorrow. For you, if you are concerned about the human rights in Xinjiang or Tibet, maybe it's a pity. But you know, the thing is that we live through such enormous changes which nobody predicted. Take, for example, the Soviet Union. Who in the West, who of those politologists and Sovietologists in the West could have predicted what happened? I mean, inside one could feel certain movements, but this was a huge failure. So, in terms of China for the time and Xinjiang, for the time being, it's there where it is, and it's a realpolitik attitude to that. What will happen next? I don't know. You know, an example comes to my mind, which is not exactly probably what we're talking about, but some years ago I was studying finance. And the professor was teaching us the golden rule to pick always the middle assets. And that was some time ago. It was just the year before the huge crisis in Mexico. So Mexican bonds, not bonds, the shares from Mexico were giving 600% return. That was right after they established NAFTA. 600%. And his words were, never buy such a thing, because it's laden with a problem. Never buy the worst, because it's the worst. Go somewhere to the center. And on Chinese assets, the amazing thing was that they were not really that was in 95, I think. They were 1994. So they were never very highly profitable. And he was saying, God knows when they will start shooting each other. So the idea is that these are things that are not predictable, what will happen, how it will go further. But what I can say is that China also has this thing in its policy. They have created probably you know, a program which they, it is promoted by the Asian Development Bank, a program for Central Asia, which is called CAREC, and they have involved all the development banks. And the difference of this program, and they call it now an international organization, is that they have China and Mongolia inside. And China says that they have this region, Xinjiang, which is definitely part of Central Asia. That's why they are member of this organization. So it is used in the Chinese diplomacy But how and where it will go, I can't say anything about the Western diplomacy in that sense.
Okay, so what I would suggest is, as Dr. Apostolov actually hasn't slept because he's been travelling to come to this conference, is that we give him a small break and then you ask your questions after the lecture, including you, Darnell.
Let him ask the question.
Okay, one more question, Darnell.
I think it's important to share this with everyone here. I'm not certain, but I was looking at the conclusions that you drew, and some of the bullet points, educate masses in the West on Muslim world. I would maintain that Islam has been in the Western Hemisphere for a few hundred years. I'll have to do some research on that, but I'm certain Judaism was there, Christianity, and most certainly Islam. And in the recent, in the contemporary sense, some of our most famous citizens of America, like Malcolm X, I mean, there are just a number of Muslims, prominent Muslims, that have played a definite role in American politics and the society as a whole. That's not to counter anything that you presented. I'm just mentioning that. The other bullet point where you talk about formulating and advance more positive and constructive picture of the West, people are tired of demagoguery, more interested in security than in abstract freedom. I thought about that, and I thought, well, you know, maybe also the converse of that is also true, that maybe people are more interested in freedom than abstract security. So we could look at that from a couple of points of view. The last thing is I'm a filmmaker. I'm from Detroit, and I grew up looking at mosques. We have several mosques there. Temple number 1 on Linwood, that's the quote-unquote black Muslim first temple in America, and then the other Muslim divisions. And so as a person of 64, I'm certainly aware, and certainly other people who have passed by these mosques have seen them too and have had their thoughts about that. But as a filmmaker, I've been invited to Iran to be part of the film festival, the first independent movie makers film festival, which will take place in September. And I was asked to also lecture there, and the other thing was to ask other filmmakers to attend and submit their films. And what surprised me was when I went out to people, even my friends and associates and colleagues, and talked to them about going to Iran, I was met with several different reactions. One was, oh yeah, let me immediately submit my film. The other one was, well, are they going to use you, or what's this all about? And so in the context of cultural diplomacy, what would you suggest? What are your feelings on taking part in cultural events in hot spots?
Cultural events in hotspots. I remember, well, my first contract in the UN was in the Human Rights Center at the time. Now it's High Commissioner's Office. And I remember somebody, that was long time ago, nobody had heard about Chechnya at the time. So there was a festival organized in Grozny. Well, now people know what Chechnya is, what Grozny is, and they asked me to invite people, and I invited people, and they went from the Center of Human Rights here in Geneva. They went to Grozny to that cultural festival, which the idea was that it would be an event that would show that people can live together, and that was before the war started. So this is the thing that comes straight to my mind. Of course, it's interesting, probably, but would it stop a conflict? I'm not convinced. If you take this example up. The other thing I was thinking whether to give up the secret with this slide, because it's a lot of it is kind of taken from another place, and it is exactly George Kennan's long telegram. And I was amazed because when I was thinking about this presentation and about this whole concept, like we live now in a changing world. I told you I'm teaching a course on regionalism, and regionalism is more kind of, it's moving a bit, well, we live in a world of nation states, but there's more kind of combining cultural combinations. So maybe now we have to take exactly the step that was taken at that time by somebody like George Kennan when he was looking at the world from the perspective of his country. What should be the strategy further? And you know, it's amazing. Maybe you can accuse me for doing that, but I took those ideas to put them here in this slide for the conclusions to what should be done next, what should be done in this building together. And his advice was exactly learn about the Russians. They are not the, yesterday we, for me not yesterday because it's almost today, we were sitting in a restaurant in Tbilisi. There was an American working for USAID, a Belgian and a Czech working for the European Commission, and me working for the UN. We were at the same conference. After the conference, we were talking. And it was so funny when we were speaking with the American woman. She was saying, we were all so we were thinking when the Russians were coming. So we were building all these hiding places in the basement. And I was telling her my stories, but that I spent two years in the Bulgarian army on the border with Greece, and there was a big poster, the enemy is 20 kilometers from here. This is the insecurity put here. And what George Kennan was saying, just try to learn more about the others, because the grassroots people are not bellicose, and there are certain elements of this insecurity which are in the elites, or you can take now in the Islamist extremist groups, etc., which are not in the grassroots masses. And this is what is the idea, probably, to learn more, to understand more who the others are. And when you're saying Islam has been in the West for so many years and you know everything about Islam, I am not convinced. I'm not convinced. I used to work as a journalist, including for Reuters at some point, and my colleague, an American, she said, well, I can't stand these people. She was a journalist living in Europe, etc. So there is more to learn and more to understand in order, and this is exactly the point, like when you, again, this is a citation from George Kennan. I'm sorry, maybe it's plagiarism or whatever, but there is nothing as terrifying and as dangerous as the unknown. So one has to learn more in order to placate those insecurities. And this is the goal, probably, of cultural diplomacy.
In which case, I think we have one more question from the middle. Did you still want to ask your question? Me? Yeah.
My question was a bit more general, and it's, sorry, to take it. So it was related to the topic. So actually, I was wondering, on your opinion, which countries, the relationship between which countries should be getting stronger in the next years, and what are the particular steps which should be taken by these countries in order the global crisis to be overcome as soon as possible? Thanks.
Well, I work for the UN. The global solutions are the best, not one-to-one country. I'm for, well, it might sound a bit bureaucratic, but the global solutions are better than the bilateral solutions. So let's work with everybody. I come from a small country, and we kind of the idea is that all the countries should work together and come together, if that pleases you. But also the idea about overcoming the crisis, again, I may repeat myself, I think the major point is that every country starts producing again. And we go beyond that world which brought us to this situation when when incomes of people were not based on wages but on financial instruments, etc. Sorry, I didn't answer to your question, I know. Do you want to
No additional questions. So do you propose that these decisions should be taken on global level and all the countries should take part in it? Or, because as far as we know, most of the times this is not happening and it's very difficult to combine so many interests. Or on the other hand, as we can observe now in Europe, that the more let's say Germany and France are the leading countries who can establish some laws and ask most of the rest of the European Union to follow them. So do you propose that it's better important decisions to be taken by all of the countries, or maybe the leading countries should take decisions, and if they're good, they can be imposed to the rest of the world or Europe?
Okay, I see your question in a different perspective then. So, well, again, as somebody coming from a smaller country, I believe that all countries here should have a say. But there are issues which have to be taken on the national level. Like, again, when we discuss the European Union, I think that there were some steps which were taken too fast ahead. Take, for example, the euro. There was an excellent article I wrote, I read some time ago on Greece and the euro. Of course, it was an American professor who wrote it, but he was saying that it was a mistake for Greece, and Greece is the one which suffers more from joining the euro. And maybe if it goes out of the euro, it will gain more. And it's actually the banks, the French and the German banks, which are going to lose more from Greece leaving the euro than Greece itself, because there will be some rebalancing which can help them get rid of the debts. And I don't know, I haven't been in Greece for quite a while, but I had some colleagues who came back 2 weeks ago, and they were saying it's really depressing. People get fired, and they have absolutely no perspective for the next 10 years. They don't see it. And suicides, burning the cars of the neighbor, it doesn't make sense, all of that. And there should be some rebalancing, but there should be a national decision. It should be a national decision. After all, the European Union is a union of nation states. If they want to go out, they should be negotiated, and they should go out of the euro. But things should be tackled, a general strategy. You know, again, this is a free discussion. When I was studying economics, I asked my professor, who was a monetarist, why the Western democracies won, basically they won in economic terms the Cold War, because of Keynesianism. And then they dropped it at the last stages of the Cold War. They dropped it. And he said, oh, well, we are gone beyond, etc. And then at some point there was Joseph Stiglitz here. And it was in the beginning of the crisis, and people were asking him exactly this question. Aren't we returning to the reasoning of Keynes? And he more or less admitted. He said, we are much more advanced now, but in Europe hasn't done this step, like thinking in terms of the Keynesian understanding. Sorry. Maybe.
Okay, I think we really have to wrap up there just because we're eating into our lunchtime. But as I said before, we can ask questions afterward. But I think once again, ladies and gentlemen, if we can just give a round of applause to Dr. Mario Apostolov.